Okay, so I think this will be the last segment for this lecture. Um, I had gone over the copy platform outline in the previous lecture, if you remember, and we went through all these points. But just remember that this is in order to get the creative output from the agency, you have to have this type of document. Call it a creative brief, copy platform outline, whatever you like. And you brief the agency after you've determined the strategy that you want, and you give them this brief, and then you expect them to give you good work after they've debriefed you and you've agreed on it. I had what I was going to do here was actually show you a, a creative brief that we used to brief an agency for one of our newly launched products. Well, not really newly launched, but kind of we're maybe relaunching it, you might think of. And go through the whole process, the debriefing presentation and the script presentation, the scripts that they offered, the production budgets, all that stuff I was going to go through. I normally would go through it in the classroom, but I don't want to put it online. So we'll skip over those examples, and I'll just kind of ask you to, keep in mind the role of this copy platform and how you use it and what you should expect from it. And then now we will turn toward the last issue, which we'll talk about, is the evaluation guidelines for the creative output. So again, we have this copy platform, right? This creative brief. We brief the agency with this, has the strategy elements, etc., etc., all the supporting information, the key facts that are useful for copywriters, the competitive analysis, all the stuff, the target audience description, etc. Now we get the creative output, and the question is, well, how do you evaluate that creative output? And by creative output, I mean like they've given you a couple of scripts, or they've produced a print ad for you, right? How do you judge whether those executions are appropriate or good or bad? So the first question that you should ask, and the most important question that there is it on brief? And by saying, is it on brief, it just means does the advertisement that they've created, does the creative output, does it satisfy the elements that you've written in the brief, the strategy, the target audience, the most importantly, the objectives. Do you think that it achieves the objectives that you have set in your creative brief or your copy platform outline? That is the most important thing, is it on brief? So does it meet the objectives that you set? Does it communicate what it's supposed to? Is it appropriate for the specified target audience? The next thing that you want to say, well, is it a clear, convincing message? Is it believable? Is it understandable? Is it, simple and clear? Another issue is, does this creativity overshadow the message? So we talked about the importance of creativity, but we also said that it's not just creativity for, art. It's creativity for advertising, right? It's advertising creativity, so it's creativity with a purpose. You don't want the creativity to overshadow the message, and this is something that we need to be aware of. And I want you to kind of pay attention and look very closely here. It's something that we can call vampire creativity. So, yeah, I apologize for that. Vampire creativity. This is something that, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. So vampire creativity is like saying that the advertising is so okay, it's so creative that it overwhelms the message, right? So people might remember the creative approach to something that's so interesting and funny and unique and whatever, but um, the message that it's, the selling message, basically the objectives that you've set for it aren't achieved because the creativity kind of overwhelms it. It doesn't do the job that it's supposed to do. It actually distracts from the message. So we call that kind of vampire creativity. It kind of like sucks the blood out of your message, and we don't want that. Is it appropriate for the chosen media? This is also an important issue. If your medium is self-paced, like print, if it's print, for example, or maybe online, mobile, where people are actually looking at it and focused and reading it, then, the message can be rather complex, right? Because people have the ability to pace themselves and absorb it, and it's what we call high involvement type of media. So the message itself can be rather complex. Remember the elaboration likelihood model, right? Remember we talked about the persuasion models, and that people can be persuaded with, rather rational and analytical approaches to, heavy duty thinking if they're motivated and if they have the appropriate time and the appropriate knowledge, so it's important that, print media and these types of self-paced media can deliver relatively complex, high involvement type of messages, but, radio and television and billboards, they cannot. A billboard on the side of the road when you're driving by at 100 kilometers an hour, well, hopefully you're not doing that fast, but, you know, in some places you can. You're not going to have time to process a complex message. It's going to have to be extremely simple, maybe just a few words or a picture. Whereas, and the same thing in a radio, right? It's kind of like background noise, or, it's not something you're really focused on and can process a very complex message. So make sure that the creative output is appropriate for whichever medium is going to be used. Another question is, how well can this creative be integrated across other media? So if you're trying to develop a full multi-legged, multi-communication platform campaign, and you want this, to be a campaign that you can use seamlessly and integrate across many other types of media, does this type of creative solution, does it lend itself to that type of integration or not? I would say a good agency should be able to adapt a particular type of approach to almost, every medium. But in some cases, it's not really possible. I don't have good examples because, typically only um, examples of, the types of messages, the types of creative output that does get well integrated. These are the ones that we see typically on, in real life from the major advertisers. We don't see all the rejects, right? But just, keep in mind that you've got to think, well, can I use this and, use this television ad as a basis of, as a kind of centerpiece around which I'll build the whole, communication program. Here, this was back when I was working for Virginia Tech, and we were looking to develop a campaign to try to sell season tickets. So this was a billboard mock-up that actually we eventually did use this approach. It's based on, there was a movie that was popular at the time with Tom Cruise, it was called A Few Good Men. So, it was very popular. So we're looking for a few good fans was kind of relevant at the time. And it was Virginia Tech. So, and the idea was that, can we use it in different media, like a newspaper ads? Can we integrate this concept? So we were evaluating various executions, like here's a cheerleader, and actually those yellow stains. You see the yellow stains on the top right? I had a rabbit at the time, and I left these on my bed, and the rabbit jumped up and peed on it. But anyway, so the question was, could these be integrated as a billboard and as newspaper uh, advertisements? So here's what the newspaper ads look like. These are real ads that appeared. And this works here, but it doesn't work on a, kind of a long concept, like this long rectangle where it's, yatai or, laying down. You see that, this works pretty well too, but again, when it comes to a billboard, it doesn't look so nice. Like if I show you here, nothing special. But this kind of did work, so we used this. And by the way, if you notice, he doesn't have a beard. The athletic director at the time didn't like the execution with the beard. So you see that it kind of works here both in a, vertical and a horizontal orientation. And does it have legs? What does that mean? That means that it can run for a long time. You want to, ideally, you want a campaign that you can kind of make little revisions to the central theme, the campaign theme, or the creative approach. You can adapt it. The positioning strategy, the position can be like long term. It's better to have really long term approach to your branding, right? You don't want to keep changing things up every year because you lose that continuity and the depth that the long like Marlboro Man, everybody knows it because it's been around for decades using the same approach. So the question is, does it have legs? You want a campaign, a creative output that you can hopefully use for the long term. And finally, if you remember the smarter objectives, E was for ethical. Is it truthful, tasteful, and otherwise ethical? You want to be, first of all, you're legally obligated to tell the truth. If you're making any claims, they have to be valid, truthful, and objectively verifiable. Otherwise, you can be, legally prosecuted. But also, is it tasteful? You don't want to offend people. So, be aware of the audience that you have and, be appropriate to that audience. Don't offend them. And otherwise, ethical. Is it ethical? Like, are you portraying, potentially dangerous situations where you don't want to portray them? Or maybe, for example, children might perceive something incorrectly or put themselves at risk. So you got to look at it through those eyes and say, are we making decisions that are ethical as well? It's not just whether we get the job done. There are other considerations, right? And I think this is the end, if I'm not mistaken, and we're just about at 14 minutes. So I will see you next time. And until then, stay safe.